Good morning, friends. Welcome to Word of Gord, another one. Average, no, it's not average. It's quite unique. OBEJournal 2019, number 4. And let's begin with this, at this early hour where I seem to be getting my words backwards. How higher self sees you. That's the you that's reading this. That's the you living your life, enmeshed in your identity, family and society. The you that copes and struggles and plays. The you that was born and will die. The you that made plans before arrival and will continue as a spirit in the after of this life. That you is an aspect of higher self, total self, source self, monad, projected from one of the energy matrices on the monadic plane, the ones who arrived here from elsewhere when invited at the ancient onset of Earth development for discrete sentient forms many millions of years in the ago of linear time. That ago is more or less irrelevant to us as spirits in the spirit realms, where history is swallowed by the reality of non-aging eternity, but is admittedly impressive to us here, seemingly trapped in the lockstep of growth and progress. As a projected aspect of higher self, you are, or would seem to be, a miniaturized model of the complete being, a holographic representation. Your share of its divine wisdom is there, but rarely immediately apparent, as it is overlaid, veiled, and blocked by the knowledge necessary for the successful navigation of the physical plane, which in its early days was so fraught with pitfalls, predators, and dangers that any kind of survival, however brief, was considered a triumph. This blocking of divine source was intentional, an experiment by planetary designers to create maximum darkness and distance from omniscience, to see just how humans might cope and learn. As monads thus invited from elsewhere, Sirius, Andromeda, Pleiades, we were intrigued and wished to challenge ourselves. Well, of course, the little part of ourselves which arrived on the surface as primitive humans soon, if not immediately, forgot all that. We became controlled by fear and convinced by separation. We were the kids that divinity forgot, God's pathetic orphans. Belief systems were built from such foundations and became myths, religions, philosophies, and political economies. Now, when higher self sees us, it sees divine beings lost in belief systems. Systems like democracy, progress, agriculture, manufacturing, worship of prophets and gods. It sees children playing, children frightened and ignorant, children educated and desirous, children mystified and lost in enchantments. It knows the distance between its vibratory level and that of incarnation is so great that the production and avid consumption of sustaining belief systems is inevitable and cannot, in this planetary system, be avoided. It allows for the entanglements thus produced. It waits patiently as we travel through ignorance and indulgence, poverty and wealth, allegiances to family, tribe, nation, and religion, the pampering of vanity and pride, the walls of fear and isolation, moral turpitude and fervor, accumulation and disbursement of treasures, devotion to ideals and profits, indulgence in the emotions, subjection to the intellect, service to self or humanity, attachment to hells, paradises, and heavens. It waits patiently because it knows our return, despite the entrapment of epochs and cultures, is inevitable, that we shall remerge with the light, becoming once again a knowing wave in the ocean, completely at ease with the pull and push of tides, and utterly uncaring of destiny, achievement, meaning, and immortality. We are rather distant from our higher selves, but we needn't be. Regular meditations, even short ones, to reconnect will help to reestablish and continue an understanding that we are purposeful emanations of higher self who can regain that original knowing without sacrificing our basic humanity. And I think we know what I mean by basic humanity. Not much squabbling about that. We can do these things, and I know a lot of you out there have achieved this or are always striving to achieve it. So, merely a reminder, not a lecture. Now, one of my correspondents has brought up the point, and I know others of you have thought this, and I've seen it in a variety of books, that not only as humanity did we arrive from other planetary systems and galaxies to help populate this new planet Earth all those millions of years ago, but that aspects of ourselves, our total selves, are currently existing on these other planetary systems, Andromeda, Pleiades, Sirius, and others. And I wanted to at least spend some time discussing that with you. And it's a very interesting and challenging point. And it's not something that I have given a great deal of consideration to when it's been brought up before. Feeling often that establishing contact with higher self and maintaining that contact and understanding or coming to an understanding of how the individual soul and the higher self relate and how the past lives of individual souls are included in that picture. And that felt like enough to be going on with. And even more so if you include the future selves. And now perhaps having worked on those themes for some time, it is appropriate that someone would suggest to me that perhaps we should be considering the distinct possibility that on a higher level, aspects of us not only are in the spirit planes of this planet, as has been discussed in previous talks, referencing the notion discovered and rediscovered by many people in regression, when they do the between life regression, find out that part of them, part of their total self, and not higher self particularly, but part of you that does not need to come into this incarnation, the percentage of the total you that is left behind in the spirit planes, whether it be 30% or 70%, those figures have been discussed. There's always that to consider as part of your total self. And we've confronted that to some degree. It's difficult, it's challenging, because it would suggest on a personal level that when Gordon, me, passes in this life from physicality to astral plane reality, there will be a chunk of me that was there all along, that didn't come into being Gordon in this life. And I've confronted that several times, including meeting astral selves or aspects of me when I'm out of body and projecting. And I can still remember the first time I met a complete mirror image of me on the astral plane, which I think one of the aspects just did to tease me. And it was quite shocking. And I got around to it eventually and saw the humor in it. But encountering other aspects can be verging on overwhelming. I wouldn't say overwhelming, but verging on it. And many of us just think on and meditate on meeting our passed on friends and beloved family members when we get there. And while all that is true and a very sort of emotional reunion it can be, meeting aspects of yourself who may appear to be completely other people until they say, hey, I'm part of you. I'm the part that you left behind before you went down to earth for a life. That can be a challenge, and it's not often talked about in the various books and journals and meditations and regressions that are recorded. And I suspect the aspects of ourselves that are living lives on other planetary systems would be a deep shock also. I can't say that I'm totally accustomed to the possibility, the reality. But it would seem that some of you are, from the emails that I get. And 3 cheers to you for moving to that level and being comfortable there. One thinks, on reflection of the experience of Robert Monroe, who described his out-of-body experiences to us in those 3 great books of his trilogy. And finally, at some point, the guides that he called inspecs, that had been, he felt, guiding him for quite some time during the trilogy, turn out at a later point to be aspects of himself. He was guiding himself all along, thinking that they were discrete others, and they didn't seem to be. And certainly gave us pause for thought on that one when we speak of our spirit guides. My encounters with spirit guides, including Henry, who has been talked about in all 3 of my Afterlife trilogy books. He felt like a discrete being. He did not feel like an aspect of me, although those of you reading the books may have felt otherwise. Um, this sense, for me, was that spirit guides of various kinds, including ones that were, how shall I say, sent to me for training, which happened a fair bit in years gone by, were, how shall I say, friends and colleagues from past lives, and were discrete, individual, evolving entities of their own sort of sovereignty, rather than aspects of Gordon, me. And in saying that, I'm not denying that other spirit guides may indeed be the ones that Robert Monroe found out were aspects of himself. It seems to me that all possibilities are laid bare in these explorations. And anything that you can imagine happening in spirit can and does happen. And that's almost the scary part. Not only are any fabulously, architecturally fabulous buildings, not only are they possible on the astral plane because of, lack of gravity, lack of financial pressure, ability to create with the mind, etc., etc. Not only are all those possible, all types of landscapes are possible for entirely the same reasons. And how shall I say, all possible types of ideas and mental creations are also possible there. Because the matter of that plane is so easily malleable and manifested and rubbed out and remanifested in another fashion. And this can go from the most simple things, not that simple, of having a home on the astral plane and changing the interior decor of a certain room because it no longer pleases you. And that's also quite possible. From that, which may seem like a fairly small-scale thing, or a garden, changing a garden, in the way that any gardener would do, but done with mental energy, not a lot of digging and shoveling. And changing large landscapes. That can be done too. And so given that all this is possible, you start to see that anything is possible. Just your grand designs get even grander, if you so choose, or you and a group of souls of like minds so choose. So you just see that anything is possible, anything at all. Some things may be a little more sort of complex and detailed to organize than others, but the basic principle is just the same. Anything is possible if you have the focus and determination to do so. Now, of course, inventive people on the physical plane will tell you just the same, that anything is possible. The entrepreneurs are very like that. They make something out of nothing through hard work and dedication, and will say in interviews and whatnot in their books that anything is possible if you stay focused long enough. I'm thinking of people like, Richard Branson, for example. Started with a small record company, and now look. And I think that's kind of his philosophy, and others are the same, many others. So that we see the principle running through all creation. All I'm emphasizing is that that sort of wild inventiveness of the strong entrepreneurs like Branson is even more possible on the astral planes if you have the ambition. And which brings up the other point, that the upper end of the astral planes, the heaven worlds, the paradises, are so incredibly beautiful and energizing and thrilling that sometimes, on many occasions actually, souls there don't feel the need to change anything because it's so darn beautiful when you get there. It's not as if it's lacking. Because many thousands, millions of souls have been there before you, including earlier versions of yourself, and have had a real go at aspect and form creation. But the possibility is always there. And even if you get to paradise and you think, why would I want to change anything? It's so surpassingly gorgeous. What could I possibly do that would make it any better? And that's a valid point, because that is the case. And you may just get focused on working on your own home. And that's fine too. You can leave the building of races and sub-races to those advanced spirits that are ready for that kind of challenge. And which reminds me, another reading I want to do in this series from a book by V. Van Dam called Starcraft, which will give you an insight into how devas, those great nature spirits on our planet, the evolved form of fairies and elves, landscape devas particularly, go about creating planetary systems. It's quite the revelation, and it will be difficult choosing appropriate passages to read because there's a lot there. As we consider these matters, I hope that this little introduction has given you some pause to ponder these possibilities. Do all of us have aspects that are living in other planetary systems now as we speak, as I speak, or just some of us? My correspondent had suggested that it's all of us. And as hard as I may find that to believe, I have to admit the possibility is definitely there. We look at ourselves, truth seekers, light seekers, aspirants to greater knowledge of spirit, as all of you are, as being in somewhat of a vanguard, because we have thrown off the encrusted, imprisoning belief systems that many others are stuck in. And we are slowly advancing. And although I'm not suggesting that any of you are proudful and arrogant, I sense that you're all quite humble about your little achievements here and there. And that's a good thing. But when we look at others who are encrusted in very traditional belief systems and would not even attempt any of the things that we do or talk about, you can't help but feel that, well, people like that have aspects living on other planetary systems. Which brings up the point that our greater being, the various stages of us, as say between us here on the physical plane now and higher self, or the monad, there are other stages. And the writer I just mentioned, V. Van Dam, he talks on several occasions about meeting his solar angel. And I think that's a term he adapted or from the channeled writings of Alice Bailey, or maybe other aspects of theosophy. But he talked about merging with his solar angel on an out-of-body experience, and how, remarkably marvelous it was. And I think he took it as a given that that solar angel existed, and he was just recounting the emerge that he had. And so the implication of that is that all of us have a level of being that could be accurately described as a solar angel, and that we have to ascend to a certain level in order to merge with that solar angel, because it's a highly evolved being and really cannot come down that far unless we meet it, to use the phrase, halfway. So perhaps the aspects of ourselves living on other planets would be in a similar situation. They know, let's say, that we're not ready to encounter them or merge with them, and that at some point, if we are, they're willing to sort of meet us halfway, to use that phrase. And that could be the case. And certainly before I merged with Higher Self, which is described initially in More Adventures in Eternity, my second book, I did feel quite connected to it, but distant, like a distant teacher. And it didn't occur to me that within a little while I would be able to merge, but I did. And the shock of that does come across in More Adventures in Eternity. And I think Higher Self knew that Gordon, was ready for that, but Gordon didn't quite know. And in that statement, and I've made that on other occasions, I'm reminded of how parents will joke about how babies come when they're ready, not when you're ready for them. They come when they're ready. And it can often, throw your life into turmoil when they do. And they're joking, but at the same time, I think they're quite serious. As a bachelor myself, I haven't lived through that in this life, but I've seen others. So I feel that, the higher aspects of ourselves move toward our consciousness when they feel we're ready, rather than we feel we're ready. And that certainly was my experience with Higher Self, although it's long enough ago now, close to 15 years, Earth time, that I'm quite accustomed to it now. But at the time, I was quite overwhelmed. And it happened in a year, as you would find out if you were reading More Adventures in Eternity, when there was a death in my family, a death in my partner's family, and a very distraught, emotional year for us as physical beings. And but yet, within that same year, I had several contacts with Higher Self. Quite powerful they were too. So perhaps I'm emphasizing this aspect of things where it can happen when you least expect it. And so don't be surprised if it does. If you think yourself as a bit of a newbie, and I'm only doing a little bit of astral projection here and there, and I'm only remembering little bits of this and little bits of that, and I've got a long way to go, don't be surprised. A sudden eruption into your aspirant's belief system, because even though we've shucked the old encumbering belief systems of religions and political systems and materialism and science and all the rest of it, we still have the belief system of a disciple or an aspirant. We think we're capable of this and this and this. We think we're capable of a certain type of progress, but maybe not a greater type of progress. We do limit ourselves by what we assume an aspirant or a disciple can accomplish under their own steam, following teachings of one kind or another, or a teacher. It certainly happened to me. And I offer that up as a little pointer for you guys. We are always capable of more out of body than we think we are. I've made that point before. Let me just emphasize it again. You needn't be the subject of random lucid dream memories, or seemingly random. And you needn't be the subject of astral trips that seem quite chaotic, zipping from one place to another and never quite getting the essence or the reality of location number 1 before you switch to location number 2 or 3 or 4. You can transcend that. As I've said to a few of you lately, you can pull back from that so that the part of you that's zipping from one astral location to the other and experiencing this and experiencing that and seeing these type of people and those type of people, you can pull back from that and see the big picture. I find meditation is a very good modality for that sort of thing. You take your disparate memories of astral trips and you pull back from them and look at them all as though, to use the metaphor I used in my first book, Eternal Life and How to Enjoy It, as though you're sitting in front of a bunch of TV screens watching different things. Rather like that great scene in Nicholas Roeg's movie The Man Who Fell to Earth, with David Bowie as the alien looking at the various TV screens to pick up patterns of human behavior so that he could fake it as being a human. And that is a good meditation, and it allows you to pull back from the excitement of various astral trips and adventures and whatnot and see the bigger picture. See the being that's doing all of this rather than the being that's getting caught up in one scenario. So if you feel that that's a good meditation to do, I encourage you to do so. And maybe on the next trip or so, we'll do a meditation of that nature and see where it takes us. And let me assure you that when I'm doing these guidance meditations, I'm going somewhere too. I'm learning things. I'm not just recapping things that I already know. I get little surprises here and there, enough to keep me going, enough to make me feel like, oh no, I'm not in, I'm not in total control here. I got spirit sending me little arrows of inspiration to awaken me out of my little sleep, my sleep of partial accomplishment, shall we say. And as I'm reminded of something that people say to me all the time, oh, it's all good. Which is an interesting monistic philosophical approach to say everything's all good, even the bad shit's good too. And in the sense that it educates you and toughens you, yes, it is all good. I would not disagree with that. It's all experience under your belt. And with that, I think I will bid you au revoir till next time, as the grey of dawn comes up here in the southern Ontario. Looks like another cloudy day. It's spring, we get a lot of those. And the buds are coming up everywhere, the little leaves on bushes and trees. Green stalks of daffodils and tulips. The promise of spring, as we say. despite all the unhappy events of the world at large, there is always the promise of spring. And if you're in the other part of the planet and you're heading into winter, I wish you well on that too. And until next time, my friends, which will not be long, I bid you a fond farewell.